The sun on Dustwell was the color of a dying fire. It hung low over the horizon every morning and never climbed high enough to feel warm. Jake Morgan wiped the rust off his hands with a rag that was already brown from years of the same job. He stood in his junkyard, surrounded by the skeletons of old machines, broken loaders, dead engines, the guts of freighters that had been stripped and left behind like bones in a desert. This was his life, fixing things that nobody else wanted to fix, living on a moon that nobody else wanted to live on. Dustwell was a fringe colony, a tiny settlement built on a mining moon that had been emptied of anything valuable decades ago. The company left, the government forgot about it, but the people stayed because leaving cost money and staying cost nothing. About 300 souls lived here, spread across a handful of metal buildings and dusty roads that led nowhere interesting. He ran a repair shop that barely kept him fed. He fixed water pumps for farmers who paid him in dried meat. He patched generators for families who paid him in thank yous. His best friend Danny Cole told him every week that he was too kind for his own good, and every week Jake told Danny to shut up and hand him the wrench. That evening, Jake sat on the hood of his old truck and ate a cold meal while watching the cargo ships pass overhead. They never stopped on Dustwell. They were always going somewhere better, somewhere that mattered. He had stopped wishing he was on one of them a long time ago. Then the sky cracked open. It started as a light, a bright streak cutting across the darkness like someone had drawn a line of fire from one end of the heavens to the other. Jake stood up. The light grew brighter and louder, and the sound hit a few seconds later, a deep, rolling thunder that shook the ground under his boots. Something big. The object hit the surface several miles east of the colony. The impact shook the walls of every building in town. Dust clouds rose in the distance like a brown mushroom, lit from below by the orange glow of burning wreckage. Windows rattled, dogs barked, people ran inside and locked their doors. Jake stood still for a long moment, staring at the glow on the horizon. His brain told him to go inside. His gut told him something else. He got in his truck. The drive took 20 minutes over rough, cracked ground. The closer he got, the hotter the air became. The dust smelled like metal and something else, something sharp and strange, like electricity and flowers mixed together. When he finally reached the crash site, he stopped the truck and climbed out. The wreckage was enormous. It was not a freighter. It was not anything human. The ship, or what was left of it, was made of dark violet metal that seemed almost alive. It curved in ways that didn't make sense, like it had been grown instead of built. Strange symbols were etched into the surface, glowing faintly even as the fire consumed the rest. Pieces of the hull were scattered across a wide area, half buried in the dirt. Some of them were still humming. Jake's heart beat fast in his chest. He had never seen alien technology before. Most people on Dustwell had never even met an alien. The galaxy was full of other species, but they didn't come to forgotten mining moons. Until now. He should have left. He should have gone back to town and reported it to Commander Dawson at the military outpost. That was the smart thing to do. That was the safe thing to do. Instead, Jake grabbed his cutting torch and his emergency kit from the truck and walked into the wreckage. The inside of the ship was a mess of collapsed walls and sparking wires. The air was thick with smoke that burned his lungs. He pulled his shirt over his nose and pushed deeper, stepping over broken panels and shattered glass-like material that crunched under his boots. Everything was dark, except for the small fires and the faint glow of the alien script on the walls. Then he heard it, a sound, weak, almost lost in the crackling of flames. Breathing. Jake followed the sound to what might have been the center of the ship. There, under a collapsed beam of that strange violet metal, he found her. She was tall, taller than any human woman he had ever seen. Her skin was a pale silver blue, and her hair, dark as space, was matted with blood. She wore armor that looked like it had been through a war, cracked, scorched, and torn. Her eyes were closed. A deep wound ran across her side, and from it seeped blood that glowed faintly blue in the darkness, like liquid light. She was pinned under the beam. She was dying. Jake didn't think. He didn't weigh the risks. He didn't consider what she was, or where she came from, or whether helping her might be the worst decision of his life. He just saw someone trapped and hurt, and that was enough. He fired up the cutting torch and went to work on the beam. The alien metal was tough, tougher than anything he had cut before, but it gave way eventually. He cut through one section, then another, working fast as the fire around them grew hotter. Sweat poured down his face. His hands shook. But he didn't stop. When the beam finally broke free, he grabbed the alien woman under her arms and pulled. She was heavy, much heavier than she looked, and her armor added even more weight. Jake gritted his teeth and dragged her across the broken floor, through the smoke, over the debris, and out into the open air. He loaded her into the back of his truck as carefully as he could. Her blue blood was all over his hands, his shirt, his truck, but she was still breathing. Jake drove back to the colony faster than he had ever driven before. He went straight to the only person he trusted with something like this, Nora Bishop, the colony's doctor. Nora was a retired combat medic who had seen things that gave most people nightmares, but even she went pale when Jake carried the alien woman through her door. They worked through the night. Nora cleaned and sealed the wound as best she could, using human medicine on a body she didn't understand. Jake held the alien woman still when she thrashed in her sleep. At one point, her eyes flew open. They were gold, bright and burning like twin suns, and she grabbed Jake's wrist with a grip strong enough to crack bone. She said something in a language he had never heard. Her voice was desperate and fierce and afraid, all at once. Then she passed out again. By morning, she was stable. Nora sat back in her chair, exhausted and staring at her patient with wide eyes. Jake sat on the floor outside the clinic, covered in blue blood, watching the sunrise paint the dust orange. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she came from. He didn't know why her ship had been destroyed, or who had done it. All he knew was that he had pulled a stranger from a fire because it was the right thing to do. Somewhere in the wreckage, a small device was still working. A signal was pulsing from the ruins of the alien ship, sending a message into deep space. A beacon, broadcasting the crash location to whoever was listening. Someone out there was going to come looking for her. And Jake Morgan, a mechanic on a forgotten moon, had no idea what he had just started. She woke on the second day like a bomb going off. Jake heard the crash from across the yard, metal trays hitting the floor, Nora shouting, something heavy slamming against a wall. He dropped his wrench and ran. By the time he reached the clinic, the alien woman had already thrown a medical cart across the room and was standing in the corner with her back to the wall, one hand pressed to her wounded side and the other raised like a blade. Her golden eyes moved fast, tracking every shadow, every sound, every threat. Nora stood near the door, hands up, blood on her sleeve from where a tray had clipped her arm. She looked more annoyed than scared. Jake stepped in front of Nora slowly. He raised both his hands, palms open, the way you would approach a frightened animal, except this animal was 7 feet tall and could probably tear him in half. "Easy," he said. "You're safe. Nobody here is going to hurt you." She didn't understand his words. That much was clear. But something in his voice, or maybe in the way he stood there with no weapon and no armor and no fear in his eyes, made her pause. Her hand lowered an inch, then another. They stayed like that for a long time, just looking at each other, the mechanic and the alien warrior, standing in a tiny clinic on a moon that didn't matter to anyone. Then she touched a device on her wrist. It was built into her gauntlet, cracked, but still working. A faint hum filled the air, and when she spoke again, the words came out rough and broken, but in English. "Where is this place?" "Dustwell," Jake said. "It's a human colony. You crashed here 2 nights ago. I pulled you out of your ship." Her eyes narrowed. She looked at him like she was trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. "You rescued me?" "Yeah." "Why?" "Because you were hurt." She stared at him as if he had said the most confusing thing in the history of the galaxy. Then she winced, and her hand went back to her wound, and the moment broke. Over the next few hours, they talked. The translation device on her wrist was imperfect. It stumbled over some words and missed others entirely. But it was enough. She told them her name was Kael'vari Shine, warrior commander of the 3rd Fleet of the Virani Dominion, and princess of the ruling bloodline. Jake asked her to say her name again, slower. She did. He still couldn't pronounce it. "I'm going to call you Kael," he said. She looked offended for about 3 seconds. Then she nodded once, like a general granting a request. Kael told them that her ship had been ambushed. Her entire crew, 40 soldiers who had served under her for years, had been killed in the attack. The ship had been crippled, and she had barely managed to steer it toward the nearest planet before it broke apart in the atmosphere. She said all of this in a flat, controlled voice, like she was giving a military report. But Jake noticed the way her jaw tightened when she mentioned her crew. He noticed the way her fingers curled into fists. She did not say who had attacked her. Not yet. Jake told her he could help her send a message to her people. He was good with machines. He could rig a signal booster from salvaged parts and try to reach a Virani frequency. Kael agreed, though she looked at him with something between suspicion and curiosity, like she couldn't figure out what he wanted in return. Danny Cole showed up that afternoon, carrying a box of food and wearing the expression of a man who had heard the wildest rumor in town and come to see if it was true. When he saw Kael standing in the clinic, tall, silver-skinned, still half-armored, he dropped the box and said a word that Nora told him never to say again. But Danny was Danny. He was scared for about 10 minutes, and then he was fascinated. He asked Kael 100 questions. She answered about 3 of them. When a door hinge broke from where Kael had slammed it earlier, she grabbed the bent steel rod and straightened it with her bare hands like it was made of wet clay. Danny watched, with his mouth open, and immediately decided she was the most incredible person he had ever met. Over the next 2 days, Jake built the signal booster. He worked in his junkyard, pulling parts from dead satellites and old relay stations, soldering wires and calibrating frequencies with tools that were held together by tape and stubbornness. Kael watched him work with a strange intensity, like she had never seen someone build something with their hands before. "Your people," she said one afternoon, standing in the doorway of his workshop. "They fix things." "Some of us," Jake said. "In my dominion, broken things are replaced, not repaired." Jake shrugged. "Out here, we can't afford to replace anything, so we fix what we've got." She was quiet for a long time after that. When the booster was ready, Kael entered a frequency code and sent a message into deep space. They waited. An hour passed. Then 2. The channel was silent. No response, no signal, nothing. Kael tried again with a different frequency. Still nothing. She tried a 3rd time, and a 4th, each time growing more tense, her movements sharper, her breathing faster. Finally, she stepped back from the console and stood very still. "The channels are blocked," she said. "All of them." "Blocked by who?" Jake asked. She didn't answer, but her face changed. The hard, composed mask she wore cracked for just a moment, and underneath it Jake saw something he didn't expect. Fear. Real, deep, bone-level fear. That night, she told him about the vow. They were sitting in Jake's small kitchen, Nora had gone home. Danny was asleep on the couch in the next room. Kale sat across from Jake with her hands flat on the table, like she was about to deliver a verdict. "In my culture," she said, "there is an ancient law. It is called the Caliph vow. When a life is saved freely, without request, without contract, without expectation of payment, a debt is created that cannot be broken. The one who was saved is bound to the one who saved them, bound by honor, by blood, by the law of our ancestors. The debt holds until it is repaid in equal measure." Jake stared at her. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I cannot leave your side. My life is tied to yours. Where you go, I go. What threatens you, I fight. This is not a choice. It is a fact. The vow was sealed the moment you pulled me from the fire." Jake opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't want a life debt." "That does not matter," Kale said. "The vow does not require your agreement, only your action, and you have already acted." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I was just trying to help." "Yes," she said, and there was something in her voice that he couldn't quite read. "That is what makes it binding." Before Jake could fully process what his life had just become, another problem arrived. Commander Rhett Dawson came to the colony the next morning with 6 armed soldiers at his back. Dawson was a tall man with a hard face and the kind of eyes that were always calculating something. He ran the small military outpost 2 hours north of the colony, and he made it clear that an alien crash landing in his sector was his business. "Hand her over," he said to Jake outside the clinic. "She's an unknown alien combatant on human territory. This is a military matter." "She's a person," Jake said, "and she's hurt. She's a risk." Jake didn't move. Dawson's soldiers shifted behind him, hands near their weapons. The air between them grew tight and dangerous. Then Kale stepped out. She had put on what remained of her armor. Even cracked and burned, it made her look like something out of a nightmare. Tall, sharp, and radiating a quiet violence that made every soldier take a half-step back. She looked at Dawson. Her translation device hummed. "I am Kael'vari Shine of the Virani Dominion," she said. "I am bound by the Caliph vow to this man. Any hand raised against him is a hand raised against my bloodline. And my bloodline does not forgive." The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Dawson looked at Kale. He looked at Jake. He looked at the 6 soldiers behind him, who were very obviously hoping they wouldn't have to fight the 7-foot alien warrior princess. He left, but he promised he would be back. That night, Jake lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. An alien princess was sleeping outside his door. A military commander wanted her gone. Someone had tried to kill her, and whoever it was had enough power to block every communication channel in her empire. And she couldn't leave. He closed his eyes and wondered, not for the first time, why he never just minded his own business. 3 weeks passed, and Kale did not leave Jake's side. She meant it literally. She slept outside his door, sitting upright with her back against the wall, and one hand resting on a broken piece of her armor that she had sharpened into a blade. When Jake woke up each morning and opened the door, she was already awake, watching the hallway like a guard on duty. When he walked to the junkyard, she walked behind him. When he crawled under a broken machine to fix a leaking pipe, she stood above him with her arms crossed, scanning the horizon for threats that did not exist. At first, it was strange. Then it was awkward. Then it became something else, something Jake didn't have a word for yet. She learned fast. Within a week, she understood most of what people said around her, without needing the translation device, though she still used it for longer conversations. Her English was rough at the edges but getting sharper every day, and she had a habit of saying things in the most direct way possible, which sometimes startled people. "Your food is terrible," she told Danny one evening after he made dinner for the group. Danny looked wounded. It's pasta. It has no value. My body gains nothing from this. It's comfort food. What does that mean? It means it makes you feel good. Kale looked at the plate of pasta. She looked at Danny. She took another bite, chewed slowly, and said nothing. But she finished the whole plate. Jake taught her small human things without really meaning to. He showed her how the coffee machine worked, and she became fascinated by it. Not the coffee itself, which she said tasted like engine fluid, but the ritual of it. The way Jake made a cup every morning before doing anything else. The way Nora held hers with both hands and closed her eyes when she drank. The way Danny stirred his with a fork, because he could never find a spoon. "You have a ceremony for this drink?" Kale said one morning. "It's not a ceremony," Jake said. "It's just coffee. You do it the same way every day, at the same time, with the same people. In my culture, that is a ceremony." Jake thought about that for a moment. Then he poured her a cup. She drank it, made a face, and drank more. Music confused her even more. Jake played old songs on a speaker in the workshop while he worked. Rock, blues, some country. Kale listened with her head tilted like a dog hearing a strange sound. She asked him why humans made music. He told her it was because it made them feel things. She said Virani did not have music. They had war chants and ceremonial hymns, but nothing like this. Nothing made just because someone felt like making it. One afternoon, a slow song came on, and Jake caught her standing perfectly still in the middle of the workshop, eyes closed, one hand pressed to her chest. He didn't say anything. He just let the song play. In return, Kale began training him. She said it was her duty because the Caliph vow required her to keep him alive. And keeping him alive would be much easier if he were not, her exact words, as fragile as wet paper. She taught him how to fall without breaking bones. She taught him how to move in a fight, how to use his smaller size as an advantage, how to read an attacker's balance and use it against them. Jake was a fast learner, but he was still human, and Kale could move faster than his eyes could follow. Most of their training sessions ended with Jake flat on his back in the dirt, staring at the sky, while Kale stood over him and told him he was improving, which he suspected was a lie. But she was patient with him, more patient than he expected from a warrior princess who had commanded warships and armies. She adjusted her techniques to match his limits. She repeated moves without frustration. Once, when he finally managed to dodge one of her strikes and land a tap on her arm, she smiled. Just for a second, just a flash, and it changed her entire face. He found himself wanting to see it again. Danny became her unlikely friend. He taught her card games, which she dominated immediately because her memory was flawless, and she could calculate odds faster than any human. Danny accused her of cheating. She said cheating required deception, and she was simply better than him. Danny didn't speak to her for 2 hours, which was a record. Nora earned something deeper: respect. One evening, a metal shard worked its way out of a wound on Kale's arm that hadn't healed properly. Nora sat her down, pulled it out with steady hands, and stitched the wound closed without flinching, even though Kale's blue blood was warm enough to burn. When it was done, Kale looked at Nora for a long moment and said, "You would have been honored among my people." Nora, who was not easily moved, had to leave the room for a minute. But there were darker moments too. Jake noticed things that Kale tried to hide. She flinched at sudden sounds, the bang of a dropped tool, the crack of distant thunder. She woke in the middle of the night gasping for air, her hands clawing at the floor. He heard her once through the wall, speaking in Virani, the same words over and over, fast and broken, like a prayer or an apology. When he came out to check on her, she was sitting with her knees drawn up, her face blank, and she told him to go back to sleep. She had a scar on her collarbone, old and deep. She touched it sometimes when she thought nobody was watching, her fingers tracing the line of it, like she was remembering how it got there. Jake never asked. He figured she would tell him when she was ready, or she wouldn't, and either way was fine. Word of Kale's presence had spread beyond the colony. Dawson had filed a report. A diplomatic envoy was being sent from the regional government. Jake knew that their quiet, strange little life had a clock on it now, and it was ticking. Then the raiders came. They hit Dustwell at dusk, a crew of 15 scavengers in armored trucks, the kind of men who preyed on fringe colonies, too small and too poor to fight back. They had heard about the alien crash. They wanted the technology. They wanted the metal. They didn't care who was in the way. They came in fast and loud, firing weapons into the air, driving through the main road of the settlement like they owned it. Colonists scattered. Danny grabbed a rifle from the storage shed. Jake picked up a heavy wrench and a cutting torch, which wasn't much of a weapon, but was better than nothing. Nora locked the clinic and stood behind the door with a shotgun she kept for emergencies. The raiders spread out, shouting demands, kicking open doors. Their leader, a big man with a scarred neck and dead eyes, walked toward Jake's junkyard, where the salvaged alien parts were stored. He didn't get there. Kale came out of the shadows like something from a nightmare. She moved so fast that the first 3 raiders didn't even see her before they were on the ground. She didn't use a weapon. She didn't need one. Her hands were enough. She broke a rifle in half with one twist. She threw a man twice Danny's size into a wall hard enough to crack the metal. She disarmed, disabled, and dismantled the raider crew with a precision that was almost beautiful. And absolutely terrifying. She didn't kill anyone. Jake noticed that. She could have. Every strike she pulled, every bone she chose to break instead of something worse. It was controlled, deliberate, merciful in a way that somehow made it more frightening, because it meant she was choosing to hold back. The remaining raiders ran. They got in their trucks and drove into the dust, and didn't look back. The colonists stood in the street, staring at Kale. She stood in the middle of the road, breathing hard, her hands loose at her sides, blue blood on her knuckles from where the armor had cut into her skin. Nobody spoke for a long time. That night, Jake found her on the roof of his shop, sitting with her legs hanging over the edge, looking up at the stars. He climbed up and sat beside her. They were quiet for a while. Then she told him. "My brother did this," she said. "High Warlord Dravenshine. He ordered the attack on my ship. He ordered my crew killed. He wanted me dead because the fleet loved me more than they loved him, and he could not stand it." Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "He is the heir to the throne. He has the council. He has the armies. And he will come for me. It is not a question of if, only when." Jake sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "Well, when he shows up, he's going to have to deal with a colony full of people who think you're worth fighting for." Kale looked at him. Her golden eyes were bright in the dark, and they were wet, though she would have denied it. "I have no home to go back to, Jake." He looked at her and said quietly, "You already have one." She didn't answer, but she didn't leave the roof. And when the night grew cold, she stayed, and so did he, and the stars above them were endless and silent and full of things that were coming. The shadow came first. Jake was outside the shop, replacing a fuel line on a farmer's truck, when the light changed. It happened slowly at first, the pale sky dimming like someone was turning down a lamp. He looked up and felt his stomach drop. A ship was descending through the atmosphere. Not a freighter, not a shuttle, a warship. It was enormous, bigger than the entire colony, made of the same dark violet metal as Kale's wrecked vessel, but intact, polished, and alive with power. It moved through the clouds with a silence that was worse than any roar. It didn't need to make noise. Its size was the statement. The warship settled into orbit above Dustwell, and its shadow fell over the colony like a blanket, turning day into something that felt like twilight. Every person in town stopped what they were doing and looked up. Some of them started praying. Kale stood beside Jake and watched the ship with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It was not fear. It was something colder, something older. It was the look of someone staring at a wound they had known would reopen, and now it had. "He's here," she said. A shuttle detached from the warship and descended to the surface. It landed at the edge of the colony, burning a perfect circle into the dust. The ramp lowered, and armed Virani soldiers marched out in 2 clean lines, tall, armored, silent. They moved like machines, every step synchronized, every weapon held at the same angle. And behind them walked Draven Shine. He was taller than Kale, broader in the shoulders, with the same silver-blue skin but darker, like a storm cloud. His armor was black and gold, polished to a mirror finish, and a long cloak hung from his shoulders. His eyes were the same gold as Kale's, but they had no warmth in them. They calculated, they measured, they dismissed. He walked through the colony the way someone walks through a room full of insects, noticing everything, caring about nothing. Jake, Danny, and Nora stood in front of the clinic. Kale stood slightly ahead of them, armored, straight-backed, and perfectly still. Draven stopped 10 paces from her. His soldiers fanned out behind him. The silence was heavy enough to crush. Draven spoke first. His voice came through a translation device built into his collar, smooth and precise, every word chosen with care. "Sister, you are alive. The Dominion rejoices." "The Dominion tried to kill me," Kale said. "Your words are empty." Draven's expression didn't change. He smiled the way a knife smiles, thin and sharp, and meaning nothing good. "A misunderstanding. The attack on your ship was the work of rogue elements. They have been dealt with. The Council demands your return. Your place is at home. My place is where I choose to stand." Draven's eyes moved to Jake. He looked at him the way a man looks at an insect that has landed on his food, a minor irritation barely worth acknowledging. "And this is the creature you have bound yourself to? A primitive, from a species that still burns dead plant matter for energy." Jake didn't flinch. He had been underestimated by smarter men than this. Draven turned back to Kale. "Come home, Kalevari. This world is beneath you. These people are beneath you. You are wasting yourself on dust and rust and creatures who will be dead in the blink of a Virani eye." Kale's voice was iron. "These creatures saved my life. They fought for me when my own blood tried to end me. They have more honor in their small, short lives than you will ever know." Something flickered behind Draven's eyes. Anger, maybe, or something uglier. But he kept his composure. He was too smart to start a fight on a human colony, even a forgotten one. An unprovoked attack would draw attention from the Virani Council and from the human regional government. And attention was the one thing Draven could not afford right now. He inclined his head, a gesture that looked like respect but felt like a threat. "I will give you time, sister. But I will return, and when I do, I will not ask again." He turned and walked back to his shuttle. His soldiers followed. The ramp closed. The shuttle lifted off and disappeared into the belly of the warship above. But Draven had not left empty-handed. In the hours that followed, Jake and Danny found surveillance devices planted throughout the colony. Small, nearly invisible pieces of Virani tech, attached to walls, water tanks, and communication lines. Draven's agents had seeded them during the visit. Some of them were already transmitting. They pulled out every device they could find, but Jake knew they probably missed some. 3 days later, the human diplomatic envoy arrived. Captain Lena Marsh came in a military transport with a small security detail and the kind of calm, tired confidence that comes from dealing with impossible situations for a living. She was in her 40s, dark-haired, and had a way of looking at people that made them feel like she already knew what they were going to say. She sat with Jake, Kale, and Nora in the clinic, and listened to everything: the crash, the rescue, the Caliph vow, Draven's visit. She asked sharp questions, and took notes on a device she kept in her jacket pocket. When Kale finished explaining the political situation within the Virani Dominion, the power struggle between Draven and the Old Council, the factions that wanted peace with humans, and the factions that wanted war, Marsh leaned back in her chair and was quiet for a long time. "This is bigger than a fringe colony," she said finally. "You understand that?" "Yes," Jake said. "If we protect her, we're making a political statement to the Virani Dominion. If we hand her over, we're making a different one." "I'm not handing her over." Marsh looked at him. She didn't argue. She didn't lecture. She just nodded once and said, "Then we'd better make sure we can back it up." Marsh arranged for limited military protection, a small patrol ship in orbit, and a ground team of 12 soldiers. It wasn't much. Against a Virani warship, it was almost nothing. It said, this colony and the people in it were under human protection, and anyone who moved against them would be moving against the species. Kale watched the preparations with a growing weight in her eyes. That night, she found Jake in his workshop and told him she should leave. She said she would take one of the salvaged communication relays, get off-world somehow, and draw Draven away from the colony. She said these people had done nothing to deserve what was coming. Jake put down his wrench and looked at her. "Running alone isn't strength, Kale. It's just a different way of losing. You don't understand. Draven will not stop. He will burn this place to the ground to get to me. Then we'll rebuild it. That's what we do." She stared at him. Her jaw was tight, her eyes were bright, and then something inside her broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way ice cracks on a river in spring. Her breath hitched, her shoulders dropped. A tear ran down her silver-blue cheek, and she wiped it away so fast it was almost invisible. "I am tired, Jake," she said, and her voice was small in a way he had never heard before. "I am tired of being a weapon. I am tired of being a symbol. I am tired of fighting for people who do not see me. I want—" She stopped. She didn't seem to know what came next. Jake didn't try to fix it. He didn't give a speech. He didn't tell her everything would be okay, because he didn't know if it would be. He just pulled up a chair next to hers and sat down, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and he stayed there. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do for someone is simply not leave. They sat together until the light faded, and the workshop grew dark, and the shadow of the warship above turned the stars into something you had to squint to see. The next morning, the colony woke to silence. The communications array was dead. Every relay, every antenna, every link to the outside world had been cut. Draven's agents had made their move. The siege had begun, and 300 humans on a forgotten moon looked at each other, looked at the sky, and chose not to run. The siege was not fire and explosions. It was thirst. It was silence. It was waiting. Draven was smart. He didn't bomb the colony. He didn't send soldiers crashing through the walls. He simply cut the lines and let the clock do its work. Without water pumps, the colony had maybe 10 days of reserves. Without communication, they couldn't call for help. Without supply ships, there was no food coming, no medicine, no parts. He sat in orbit and waited for the humans to break. They didn't. On the first day, the colonists rationed the water. Every family got a measured amount, no more, no less. Nobody complained. On the second day, Jake and Danny started digging, an old well shaft that had been sealed years ago when the pumps were installed. It was hard, back-breaking work in the red dust, and the water they found at the bottom was dirty and tasted like iron. But it was water. On the third day, Nora organized a medical station and began cataloging every medicine and bandage in the colony, because she knew that what was coming would not end quietly. Kale watched all of this. She stood at the edge of the settlement and watched the humans dig and build and patch and plan. And there was something on her face that Jake had never seen there before. It looked like wonder. "In the Dominion," she told him on the fourth night, sitting beside the well while Jake rested his raw, blistered hands. "When a siege begins, the weak surrender. The strong fight alone. No one does this." She gestured at the colony, at the family sharing rations, at the old men reinforcing walls, at the children carrying water buckets too heavy for them. No one suffers together by choice. "That's because they've never met humans," Jake said. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "In my entire life, no one has ever chosen to suffer for me, only because of me. There is a difference." Jake looked at her. "Yeah, there is, and every person here knows which one they're doing." On the fifth day, Jake had an idea. The wreckage of Kale's ship was still out there in the dust field. And somewhere in that wreckage was the original signal beacon, the one that had been broadcasting since the crash. If they could salvage it, rebuild it, and boost the signal using Kale's knowledge of Virani communication technology, they could punch a message through Draven's jamming field and reach Captain Marsh's patrol ship. It was a long shot, the kind of plan that worked in stories and failed in real life. But it was all they had. Jake and Danny drove out to the crash site under cover of darkness. Kale wanted to go, but Jake told her to stay. If Draven's agents saw her leave the colony, they'd know something was happening. She didn't like it. She told him he was fragile. He told her he'd be fine. She grabbed his arm before he left, and her grip was strong enough to leave a bruise. And she said one word in Virani that the translator didn't catch. He didn't ask what it meant. He figured he'd find out later. They found the beacon buried under a collapsed section of hull. It was damaged, but not dead. Danny held the light while Jake worked, pulling circuits and reconnecting wires with fingers that were more used to fixing tractors than alien technology. When they brought it back, Kale spent 3 hours modifying it with components from her wrist gauntlet, rewiring the frequency to bypass Draven's jamming signal. On the 7th morning they powered it on and sent one message: short, clear, coordinates, situation, request for immediate assistance. Then they waited. On the 9th day, Draven's patience ran out. The shuttle came down fast, and this time it wasn't carrying a diplomat. 30 Virani soldiers dropped from the sky in armored pods, landing in a ring around the colony. They moved inward, weapons drawn, marching in perfect formation toward the center of the settlement. Jake had known this was coming. They all had. The colonists had built barricades, walls of scrap metal, overturned vehicles, welded plates pulled from dead machines. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't professional, but it was solid. And behind those walls stood every person in Dustwell who could hold a weapon or throw a rock. Farmers with hunting rifles, mechanics with cutting torches, Danny with his rifle, and a look on his face that said he had never been more scared and had never been more sure of where he was supposed to be. Nora was in the clinic, ready for what was coming, and Kale stood at the front, fully armored, holding a blade she had forged from the remains of her own ship. She looked like what she was, a warrior born for battle. But there was something different about her now. Something human, if that made any sense. She wasn't fighting to win or to survive, or because her code told her to. She was fighting because she loved these people. And that was a reason the Virani had never understood. The first wave hit the barricades. The colonists held. Jake fired a salvaged weapon from behind a wall of stacked engine blocks, his hands shaking, his aim bad, but his courage steady. Danny fought beside him, shouting things that weren't words, just raw sound to keep the fear at bay. Kale met the Virani soldiers in the gaps between barricades, and she was a storm. She moved through them like water through cracks, her blades singing, her body turning and striking with a speed that made the air hum. She fought not to kill, but to stop, disarming, disabling, knocking soldiers unconscious with calculated strikes that showed more skill than cruelty. Then Draven came. He walked through the line of fighting like it was beneath him, his black and gold armor untouched, his cloak trailing in the dust. His eyes were locked on Kale, and when they faced each other, the battle around them seemed to fade. "You shame our bloodline," he said. "You murdered our people," she answered. They fought. It was not elegant. It was not beautiful. It was violent and desperate and full of years. Years of rivalry. Years of silence. Years of a sister trying to earn the respect of a brother who only ever saw her as competition. Draven was bigger and stronger. His strikes came heavy, driving Kale back step by step. He cut her arm. He cracked her armor. He hit her hard enough to send her to one knee. Every time, she got back up. Jake saw it happening from behind the barricade. He saw Kale struggling, and he saw Draven pressing his advantage. And he knew that if the fight went on much longer, Draven would win. Not because he was better, because he was willing to kill, and she wasn't. Jake didn't grab a weapon. He grabbed something else, the signal beacon. He had kept it running, broadcasting on the frequency Kale had set. But now he changed the settings. He opened the channel wide, not to Captain Marsh, but to every Virani military frequency he could reach. He turned the beacon into a broadcast tower, and then he pointed it at Draven. Every word Draven said carried, every grunt of the fight, every clash of metal, and when Draven, pressing his blade against Kale's throat, leaned close and whispered what he thought only she would hear, it went everywhere. "I should have killed you in your sleep when we were children," he said. "I burned your ship. I slaughtered your crew. And when I bring your body home, the council will weep and call you a hero, and I will sit on the throne and forget your name." The words echoed across the Virani military channels. Every officer on the warship above heard it. Every soldier on the ground heard it. Every council member within range of a long-distance relay heard the heir to the Virani throne confess to murder and treason. The effect was immediate. Draven's soldiers stopped fighting. They lowered their weapons and stepped back. On the warship above, the engines powered down. Draven looked around, confused at first, and then he saw the beacon in Jake's hand, and he saw the blinking light that meant it was transmitting, and his face went white. "You," he started. "Yeah," Jake said. "Me." Kale rose from the ground, blood on her face, fire in her eyes, and she knocked the blade from Draven's hand with one strike. His own soldiers surrounded him, not to protect him, but to hold him. An officer stepped forward, removed Draven's cloak, and spoke a phrase in Virani that Kale later told Jake meant something like, "You are no longer recognized." It was over. Captain Marsh's patrol fleet arrived an hour later, 3 frigates dropping out of faster-than-light travel, like cavalry coming over a hill. By then, the fighting had stopped. Draven was in custody, held by his own people. The Virani soldiers on the ground stood down and waited for orders that would now come from the council, not from a disgraced warlord. Danny was in the clinic. A Virani blast had caught him in the side during the battle, and he had kept fighting for 10 minutes before his legs gave out. Nora operated on him with steady hands, and a vocabulary of curse words that impressed even Kale. He would live. He would complain about the scar for years. In the days that followed, the Virani Council made contact. They were careful, diplomatic, and very interested in speaking with Kale. They offered her a position, not the throne, but a seat on the council, a voice in the rebuilding of a dominion that had been rotting from the inside for too long. It was everything she had once wanted. Kale told them she would think about it. A week later, the ships were gone. The warship had left orbit. Marsh's fleet had pulled back. Dustwell was quiet again, dusty, broken, and exactly the same as it had always been, except for the new barricades and the scorch marks, and the fact that everyone in town now knew what it felt like to stand up to an empire and not blink. Jake was in his junkyard, fixing a generator that had been damaged in the fighting. The sun was low, the dust was red, the sky was empty and open and wide. He worked alone for the first time in months, and the silence felt wrong, like a room with a missing wall. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Kale stood there. She was still in her armor, but it was clean now, repaired, the cracks sealed with new metal that caught the light. She looked whole, she looked strong, and she was smiling. A real smile, open and unguarded, the kind she had never worn before she came to this moon. "The Caliph vow is complete," she said. "During the battle, I shielded you from a blast that would have killed you. The debt is repaid. I am free." Jake nodded slowly. Something in his chest tightened, but he kept his voice even. "I understand." She stood there. She didn't move. He waited. Then he said, "So why are you still here?" Kale looked at him, this small, stubborn, kind, impossibly brave human, who had pulled her from a fire and never once asked for anything in return. This man who had taught her that strength was not about armor or blades or bloodlines. It was about choosing to stay when everything told you to run. "Because I want to be. Because this place, this dusty, broken, stubborn little moon, is the first place that ever felt like home. And you are the first person who ever made me feel like I was more than a weapon." Jake looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached down, picked up a wrench from the workbench, and held it out to her. "There's a generator out back that needs fixing," he said. She took the wrench, and on a forgotten moon, under a sky full of stars and dust and the memory of everything that had come and gone, a mechanic and a warrior princess stood side by side and got back to work. Because that's what humans do. They fix things, they hold on, they stay. And sometimes that's enough to change the galaxy.